I'm Rusty Wise in the Wise News Network studios today with a special guest, Mr. Kelly Hastings, and with North Carolina House 110. And appreciate you coming in today, Kelly.
It's an honor to be here.
You've decided to run again,
Mm-hmm.
and you were not going to run, and now you're running. Can you enlighten us on that decision?
I surely can. So we had about 8 people who came to me and said, "Hey, we're ready to run for office." And of course, in my position, those were Republicans. They were saying, "We're ready to run and take your Republican seat." And I said, "Great," because as part of leadership, I think empowering other people is really important. So I had prepared to do that. And so as time passed, a number of those people came back and said, "Hey, we can't run at this time. Our spouses won't let us. My fiance won't let me. Our jobs won't let us." And so remember, I had submitted a long list of names of people who had said they wanted to run. And so that left us with one other person. It was a young lady from Cleveland County, Lawndale, I believe, who was thinking about running for school board over there. And so I was actually in communication with her and speaking to her and trying to be a mentor. And so at a certain point, our caucus became nervous because nobody had officially committed at that time. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I told the caucus after they asked me and some other people in the area that I would run again if my wife would let me. So we went ahead and made the decision to run again before I knew that someone else might or not run. So that's what happened. And then later on, I think the person that I'd been talking to in Cleveland County then decided not to do the school board over there and to possibly run for the House. And so, but before I knew anybody else was running, I had already committed to run. There was a lot going on behind the scenes trying to figure out who would run and take the seat at whatever point. And so that's how it all transpired.
Gotcha. This will be how many years have you been in the House?
I've just finished the 15th year.
15.
Mm-hmm.
2-year terms.
2-year terms.
Now you've had some challengers, a couple in the past, I think.
I've had quite a few primaries and general elections. So,
and this year be the primary coming up on March 3rd. Now early voting is actually February 12th.
Starts
it's
in
early, through the 28th, and then the primary is March 3rd.
And interestingly enough, the mail-out ballots will be going out in a few days to some people.
Oh wow, that early?
That early. It's
comes
amazing.
Quick. Comes quick.
It comes very quickly.
Well, give us a little bit about your life history, a little bit, and where you're from, and
sure. So grew up in Cleveland County, and then obviously married a Cherryville girl, and that's how I got here initially via her family, etc. And actually graduated from Shelby High, and then went on to Appalachian. Also went to Gardner Webb and for a little while, and Cleveland Community College, NC State for a little while, but really finished it at Appalachian. And so along the way, I went off, joined the Marines, enlisted in the Marines, and did my time there. And at a certain point, there was a new bank coming to Shelby. And that bank was actually going to take the driveway that my family used for our small manufacturing business. And we would have had no way to load and unload the transfer trucks at the upper level where all the storage of the materials was located. And I realized then you can really get in trouble by government action if you're not paying attention, and that sometimes government power can, in that instance, it could have ruined a small business, a family's livelihood. So I decided to run for city council. I was very young, I think maybe my late teens, early 20s, and a longtime incumbent defeated me by a couple of hundred votes. And so I realized then that I I probably was going to eventually run for office at some point at another level or at that level, whichever the case would have been. And so that's sort of my background. And my parents still they live in Shelby actually. So that's a little bit of the brief background.
I know you mentioned Shelby and the district, the way it's drawn up, it's like Shelby split in two, sort of. Like the northern part, I think, is 110, the southern part's another district. Like Gaston County's kind of split up.
Yeah.
Why is it drawn that way?
Well, so first of all, redistricting law is very complicated. We've got a state constitution that has a mandate in it that counties should remain whole. We've also had federal laws that involve redistricting, drawing district lines, Voting Rights Act, federal judicial court cases, state judicial court cases. And so back to your basic question. Here's what happens in North Carolina. So after the census, you take the number of House districts and you divide that by the number of districts, the number of people by the number of districts. And that gives you the requisite number of people that need to be in the district. At the state level, there's a 5% variance one way or the other. At the congressional level, they have to be basically perfect. So what happens is, since we have to try to keep in a court ruling, we have to try to keep our counties whole as much as possible. So when you start the redistricting process, remember you've got a border to the south, a border to Tennessee, a border to Virginia, and the ocean out to the east. So you have to work within the boundaries of the state. Then you take it down one step further. And under that Stevenson ruling, you have to try to keep a county whole if you can. For instance, the last few redistricting cycles, Lincoln has been a perfect, what we call one. And there are other ones in the state, and they have to be drawn first because they're counties that can be kept whole, one person, one district, no variation. Okay? So then after you get all of your ones drawn, you have to go to twos. And that means you might have a county that has one whole district, and then their population means that they have another partial part of a district that has to be, you have to find somewhere for them. Because remember that the districts have to be within 5% of that number after the division is done. So then you go to the twos. Then, for instance, you come to Gaston County, and we actually ended up being a 3. So when you start at the eastern boundary, you can't go north to Lincoln. You can't go to South Carolina, not going to Mecklenburg because all of that county needs to be kept whole with all of its districts. So you end up over here, you fill the 2 whole districts in that you start at the east. So you've got one that primarily has the northeastern part of Gaston County down to a certain area around 85 or so. And then you have the southeastern part that also has a district down there. And so by the time you fill those numbers for those 2 districts, it moves west. And so by the time you get to my district or the 110th, or it's not my district, it's the people's district, but the one I represent, you have to start moving west. And so that's what takes it over into Cleveland County. And the same thing with that southern portion of the district. Once say House District 110 in Cleveland and Gaston is redrawn, then you have to move in and redraw another district to pick up the other portion of Cleveland, and it drove it into Rutherford County. So it picked up part of Rutherford County this time since all the numbers moved us west. So that's That's it. That Stevenson decision that mandated that you try to follow the Constitution as much as possible and hold and keep counties whole. That's a pretty significant court ruling.
I know, trying to represent multiple towns, multiple counties, it can be a challenge for a representative too.
Yes.
Instead of just dealing with one county, you're
Sure.
dealing with several counties
Well, and
and
think about
several
this.
different towns.
Think about this, Rusty. So Gaston has 3 members. Cleveland has 2, and I have 2 counties. Paul Scott, who has the southern part of Cleveland, and Rutherford, he has 2 counties. But to get to that requisite number, some districts have 7, 8 counties to get to that number that has to meet the court ruling. And right now we have roughly 90,000 per house district. And they're all pretty close to that 90,000. Like I said, there's a little variation at the state level, but at the congressional level, they basically have to be perfect.
Got you.
Because they weren't part of the state ruling. The Stevenson case that I'm talking about was directly related to the state redistricting.
Shifting gears a little bit, out and about, what are you hearing on the streets from people? What's their biggest concerns, do you think?
It varies from time to time when I'm out. I mean, sometimes it's transportation. Obviously, that's been a big deal here in Cleveland and Gaston counties. It's been a huge deal. Taxes, of course, and affordability, jobs in the economy. But with different groups, you hear different issues come up. Obviously, education is a big one. That's over half of our state budget. Education alone is over half of we have a 30-something billion dollar state budget, but by the time you add in the federal money, it's up around 70 billion. So,
well, speaking of education, I know Gaston County schools, if you look at different grading systems or whatever, the public education system for the state is towards the bottom, as far as teachers' pay and that sort of thing. Is there anything we can do to improve that, you think, as far as, teacher pay goes and the supplements? I know the counties do supplements, but it seems like the counties are not supplementing a lot either. So.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of different variables that have to be included in all of this. And for instance, when we took control, and we were sworn in 2011, the state had massive debt, high taxes, and teachers and state employees were being furloughed. And the governors at that time were wanting to balance the budget by not fully funding the state teachers and employees' retirement. And they've continued to try to do that. So what we decided to do, and back at that time, they would give the teachers a small raise, but hit them with a big tax increase. So what we started doing was approaching it from a fiscally conservative standpoint. We started providing pay raises, but when we provided pay raises, we were cutting taxes. And we chose not to furlough teachers. And we chose not to try to balance the budget by not fully funding their retirement accounts, teachers and state employees. So when you hear that about North Carolina, there are a couple of other variables that a person needs to think about. One, they have 10-month contracts. They have received consistent pay raises since 2012, 2013, and I have those numbers with us. That's all teachers. We've also given state employees raises along the way, whatever the taxpayers allow, because the taxpayers only send so much money to Raleigh. And so we have to respect what comes in via the taxpayers. A couple of other things that people don't think about. The teachers and state employees have one of the best healthcare systems in the country. They also have, and it's self-funded, by the way. The teachers and state employees health plan is self-funded. And they also have great vacation and life insurance and liability insurance. We picked up a few years ago where now the taxpayers pay for their liability insurance and have a fantastic retirement system that, remember, some of the governors who were in opposition to us wanted to balance the budget by not fully funding their annual required contribution, and we didn't let that happen. And so when you look at the overall pay raises with the other benefits we've provided, some that you don't hear a lot about, and on 10-month contracts, you really have to weigh more variables than sometimes you hear in the press or from a special interest group. There's much more to it. And remember, the state budget that I mentioned, over $30 billion, over half of that goes to education right now. Then on top of that, you have another huge portion from the lottery that goes to education, various expenditures for capital, whatever it might be, capital, scholarships, et cetera.
Well, that lottery money,
Mhm.
I'm sure there's a board that looks after that to make sure that lottery money goes where it's supposed to go. We'd really have it, before the lottery was even developed. I guess the citizens thought we were going to have this big windfall
Yeah.
and, we're just going to have all this money flowing in.
Mm-hmm.
But where does that money go? The lottery money?
There is a lot of money flowing in. There's billions billions of dollars that flows into the lottery.
How's that allocated? Is it dispersed evenly, or how's the disbursement of those funds?
Well, there are various different programs. For instance, wartime veterans scholarships, the children of wartime veterans, capital, things like capital that have to be taken care of, transportation, so all of that, and some of this is university money, for example. Not all of that education money goes directly to K through 12. We have 3 levels of education in North Carolina. We've got basically the K through 12, and then we've got the community colleges, and then we have the universities. And so all of those take part in that lottery money. Now, here's one thing that I've requested a number of times. Even we recently had an audit of the lottery. The auditor did an audit, but before that, I had requested from our fiscal staff to provide us with the information about where the money goes in what percentages. And so, but you have to remember that lottery. If you ever see that lottery building in Raleigh, it's huge. There are a lot of employees. If you watch TV, look at all the advertising they're spending on advertising, overhead, uh, pay for the lottery staff, and the payouts of the lottery, which I was not there when the lottery became law, and I don't even play the lottery. But I feel like it's my responsibility to keep up with it, to the best of my ability. But so many expenditures that apparently are going to provisions outside of education.
Well, I just, the appropriations committee or whoever looks at that and just makes sure that money is spent where
Yeah.
it should be spent.
Yeah, and like I said, the auditor, Dave Bullock, the state auditor, just did an audit of that, and they did reference that you're seeing increased expenditures, income, and maybe fewer expenditures, but some of these games that they're advertising and the payouts are bigger, the advertising costs, the personnel costs.
Yeah.
It's
Does
astronomical.
the state get money off like DraftKings and stuff now since it's implemented?
Well, so
The online gaming.
yeah, the online gaming. So that is really kind of a different. That's a different.
Yeah, it's a different, but I didn't know if
situation.
the state was getting income off that because
Y-
it was passed, what, a year ago or so?
Yes, it was, and now for that particular provision, I didn't vote for it because it had a provision in there for betting on amateur sports, and I just, to each his own. But
Yeah, we can go down the rabbit hole
yeah,
of sports and NIL and all that. That's
to each his own.
yeah,
But
that's
I just wasn't comfortable betting on amateur sports. And we've had a lot of situations where we've had investigations and arrests and prosecutions for kind of throwing a game. People threw games intentionally, and
yeah.
it just didn't feel right to me to go for that on especially the amateur sports. So I didn't vote for it, but it is a completely different new provision now where tax revenue, you are correct, tax revenue is coming in, but that is separate from the lottery. I mean, that particular provision is separate from.
Well, gambling is a source of income for the state. With Two Kings, I think down here, that's coming along, the casino. Um,
And the Indian reservations,
yeah.
they have gambling. So.
Now back to the budget. Now,
Mhm.
working on the budget, it's been, I think, since 2023 that state has a formal budget, and I think you are working off mini budgets. Is there a, is the what's going on with the budget?
Yeah, that's not really accurate. So a few years ago, approximately 10 years ago, we had a situation where the executive branch and the legislative branch could not come together on a budget agreement. And that put us in the same position as the federal government's in when they can't come to an agreement with a potential shutdown. So when we finally came to an agreement on that budget in that budget cycle, we put in a provision saying that if the executive branch and the legislative branch cannot come to an agreement, we're going to automatically have a budget in place that funds at the last biennium level. And that's called via is called a continuing resolution. And so we have a budget in place. A lot of people get confused about that. We've got a budget in place. And not only that, this year alone, we've passed billions of dollars of other budgetary items for natural disaster response, new DMV offices, new personnel for DMV because the executive branch was having trouble operating, so we passed the provision to help with that, and we have some emergency provisions down at the coast with the Coast Guard that we had to pass some money, and so we have a budget in place now. What some people get confused about is after COVID, we had so much money flowing in from the federal government that we had a provision there where a lot of members were able to ask for member projects. So that would be something worthwhile for the community. For instance, here we had a water project we needed, and so we got some money in the budget for that. We helped with Fraley Field and other items around the whole state, municipalities, counties. We even got a little bit of money in there to help with the YMCA here in Cherryville and other places because they have an after school program that helps kids. So we don't those member projects are not projects that help a member, so to speak. They're projects that help the taxpayer as a whole. And it could be. And so what you're hearing is we've just not gotten in this budget cycle around to member projects, but we have a budget in place and we have
Okay.
billions of dollars of emergency type appropriations that we did in 2025 also.
But I guess the formal budget has not been passed. Is there a sticking
No, there's
point on that?
no,
Or?
there's a formal budget.
Okay.
We
Okay.
have a budget in place. It's a continuing resolution.
Oh, okay.
But like I said, there are variations during every budget cycle as to what gets priority at which time. The other thing, Rusty, that people get confused about the budgetary process is it's never over. The way our state is growing, the way we're having so many natural disasters, the changes at the federal level, um, Medicaid provisions, waste, fraud, and abuse that might be found along the way. We're constantly having budget technical corrections. It's constantly being reviewed, analyzed, and by the way, and I have to give these people a kudos. Our staff at the General Assembly, our central staff, they are primarily nonpartisan career experts in legal and physical matters. And they work for members of the whole General Assembly, regardless of party. And so a lot of these items, that's the reason that when we have budgetary items or education items or what have you, those are bipartisan votes because that central staff, they're working with all members of the General Assembly, not just one person or two. And so that's why you'll see a lot of our budgetary and fiscal matters are passed on a bipartisan basis. In fact, we've overridden the governors on a bipartisan basis. So our fiscal staff and our legal staff down there, they are top-notch people who are really experts in their field.
When you talk about member appropriations, how is that divided up? Is it, I know a new member, it can be difficult to get things. Is it, does longevity help with member appropriations?
Well, yes, it does, and part of that is not just a person receiving favoritism, but it's a person being in place to know when to ask and how to ask and what types of projects are legitimate. For instance, we've got a number of projects right now we're working on in our area. Some of those key projects are volunteer fire facilities because we've got some departments around and we've done well with getting them money, but at certain times, fire departments come forward and request it in writing. They have everything in order. They have land secured for a new building, et cetera. Sometimes the requests are a little bit premature. Buildings aren't, the plans aren't in place. The land's not in place. Now, for me, one of the good things for me is I've chaired transportation, finance, numerous committees, but right now I chair capital. And that capital committee is a great committee to learn the different types of requests that we can make for various projects, whether it's fire departments, water and sewer infrastructure, whatever it might be.
So it probably goes back to the entity requesting the money, how far along they are in the process and how detailed they are.
It can. In fact, we've got a fire department here that they were on the top of my list and they knew it. And then they came to me and said, "Hey, we're sorry, we don't have the necessary land at this point." And so what we would do is move that off the top of the list and move another project up that might be ready.
Gotcha. Shifting gears a little bit, just because I'm in it, Minnesota and all what's going on up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been an eye opener for all the states in the country is how much fraud is going on out here. And I hope North Carolina has taken notice and say, hey, maybe we need to check on some things.
Well, and that's what we've done over the last 15 years that I've been there. And one of the things that we started with was Medicaid fraud. And here's what was happening. So there were providers out here, out in the public, who were recommending certain treatments that really weren't necessary. And so what ended up happening is you had a lot of people receiving treatments for, quote, ailments that they really didn't have. And so that's one of the first things that we started doing was finding the waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. And so, but it's in all big departments. Now, one of the things that happened to me that I thought was interesting, our auditing community. I had a buddy in college who's an auditor, and he worked for the state controller's office, and we needed to modify our internal auditing statutes, and it gets kind of in the weeds, but it's interesting. So you might have a whistleblower out here who calls in to the auditor and says, so-and-so's doing this. Well, that auditor might, in the audit work papers, write that person's name down in the allegation. Well, that doesn't mean that the person is guilty. And so what we did was we changed the internal auditing statutes so that those types of audit work papers would remain confidential while the auditor's doing his or her work. And that way, you don't have an innocent person have a complaint made against them and they get smeared in the public, but they really weren't guilty. But we modified those internal auditing statutes to make it easier for the auditor to look at those big state agencies, including the UNC system, to start ferreting out some of that waste, fraud, and abuse.
Well, I just thought I brought it up because that's a big thing, you know, and had daycares that no children in them, and that was big time fraud, you know.
When I think I was a freshman or either the next year, I walked onto the house floor. You know, when you're new, you really don't know yet. There's a pretty big learning curve. And we walked onto the house floor, and one of the Health and Appropriations chairs, DHHS, Health and Human Services, excuse me, walked onto the house floor and said, "Hey, we're going to have to vote to appropriate. I think it was either 200 to $300 million because of Medicaid waste, fraud, and abuse." And that's one of the first votes I had to take. And right after that vote is when an aggressive move started to start ferreting out and ending the waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. And I don't know that you ever get totally to the bottom of it because you always are going to have fraudsters out there. Fraudsters exist. No matter how hard you try, you're still going to have fraudsters out there.
Well, we just make sure it's no systemic major deal, you know.
Well, it's a lot of money. It's been a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. Shifting gears now to the Gaston County Police. Now, Gaston County Police is the only county that has its police force. And I was doing some research. It said in 1957 it was formed out of the request of the commissioners to the General Assembly to develop that police force. And I don't know if I'm totally correct, but it said it was over some alcohol. If some alcohol was not enforced right, and then also politics. They thought maybe the sheriff's department was getting too political every 4 years, so they developed the Gaston County Police Force, which they do a great job. And not saying it's not needed, but it's the only one in North Carolina. It used to be Mecklenburg had a county police force, and they've combined that.
I remember that.
What's your thoughts on the county police? And is it efficient? I don't know.
Well,
to have two.
Yeah.
You know?
So we have, not only that, we have municipalities with law enforcement agencies. So we have municipalities and we have counties, the county police, and then we have the sheriff's office. In a lot of counties, the sheriff's office basically, in some ways, is to handle the civil process in the jail. They've not ventured out into some of the more expansive law enforcement duties. I'm not saying that's the case here because I know our sheriff's department has ventured out into more extensive law enforcement duties. Then you have the municipalities. A lot of those have really highly qualified law enforcement officers. And then you get down to the Gaston County Police, and they are highly qualified law enforcement officers, and they have extensive duties, and they're not really tasked with manning the jail or serving civil process papers. So I looked at all of it, and I kind of waited. I looked at what's going on in Cleveland County. I looked at some of the municipalities, I think, severed at one time their agreement with the Gaston County Police so that they weren't as present as they were at one time, which left some of those areas, it was either the sheriff's office or that was it.
I think Bessemer City tried it. I think
Yeah,
they dissolved their own and then went to that way. And
yes, and so just to answer your question about the politics of it, so generally when you have a delegation, say a Gaston County delegation in the House, sort of the protocol and the respect to the people and to other members is if we're going to have a local bill, something that just affects Gaston County or Cherryville or whatever, totally local bill, especially if it's Gaston County as a whole, because you've got all three of our House members in all parts of the county. We try to have it so that we have a unanimous delegation on those types of things. So back when I first was running years ago, I had discussions with Gaston County Police and others, and I made a commitment at that point not to dissolve the Gaston County Police, for better or worse, whatever people think. But I made a promise, and I have not broken that promise, and I don't plan to. So it's my full intention to keep the Gaston County Police in effect.
yeah, I mean, both departments do a great job,
They do.
and it's just rare that they're the only county that has that. And
Mhm.
I assume the sheriff's department does all the rural areas in the other counties as far as protecting the citizens there. I assume.
They do, and so that could be a budgetary process. It could be that in counties where you don't have a county police, more money, training, et cetera, conceivably could go to the sheriff's office. However, I mean, we have an outstanding sheriff's office in Gaston County. I'm not downplaying their effect at all.
No, I think both departments are excellent. I just, from a business standpoint to a financial standpoint, having two departments, is it feasible? I don't know. From a business standpoint, economics.
And I've never, nobody's ever requested that I do a fiscal note on what it would be to merge those. Nobody from the county's ever asked me to, and nobody from Gaston County Police has asked me
Yeah.
to actually have a physical note done to show exactly what the costs are one way or the other.
Is there anything that you could change? Is there something on your plate now that you really wish you could change or fix or improve? Is there like just since you've been in office, is there something that's been in your crawl maybe?
Well, one of the biggest changes that we're really still in the process of doing is in the area of transportation. It used to be that it was really the norm for a powerful politician to be able to insert a road project into the budget. That's happened. I know of a couple down east and some other places, and we changed that process to a data-driven process so that now, primarily, unless it's a safety project or something of some import like the disaster following a natural disaster where you need to move quicker. Um, Now, but on the basic transportation funding formula now, and I used to chair transportation, but I was not a sponsor of this bill. But I get to a point. I supported it, and the reason was the data now drives projects. And for instance, we're in the Gaston, Cleveland, Lincoln Metropolitan Planning Organization. Those are mandated by the federal government. Only two entities now can submit projects for prioritization. That's the division engineer over in Shelby, but he lives in Hickory, and the MPO. And those projects that are submitted now for prioritization have to be fiscally constrained, meaning the Gaston, Cleveland, Lincoln MPO can't submit $20 billion worth of projects and they've only got $1 billion. And so that's made it now so that we have to really be fiscally conservative and make sure the best projects are being submitted. Because remember, if you've got a project on your fiscally constrained list, let's say it's a $300 billion project, and it can't be built, that $300 million is not going to another project in the MPO. As long as it's on that list, it's a fiscal constraint. And so now, for instance, we had a large toll road that was going to be in southern Gaston County. One of the reasons that it failed is because it was tied up in a federal lawsuit, and there was a new runway at the Charlotte airport that was going to interfere with the configuration of that. And so the project couldn't be built. So remember, it was tied up in a federal lawsuit. So it makes it now so that if those types of instances come about, the MPO and the division engineer have to really make a serious decision and say, hey, are we going to tie all this money up, or are we going to go ahead, take that project off the list? It can always be submitted later, but are we going to take it off the list now so that we can actually see something in our lifetimes? And that's why you're getting ready to see now the Dallas-Cherryville Highway was done as a safety project, but you're getting ready to see the completion of the Shelby bypass. The first phase of the widening of 85 is getting ready to start. But before that, you're getting ready to see 2 new bridges, the South Fork and the Catawba, are being replaced with 2 new 6-lane bridges. And that's going to happen before the 85 widening. So now what you're seeing is billions of dollars of projects coming to our area in the very near future, including the completion of the Shelby bypass, which is part of that overall vital 74 corridor from the mountains to the coast. And remember, those 2 final phases of the Shelby bypass were not guaranteed to be funded.
Well, that's been a 30-year project, 30 to 40 year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So finally it's getting to fruition. I know this 150 through Cherryville and Cleveland, Cherryville, it's getting busy now.
Mm-hmm.
The traffic count keeps going up. So we have to look at, arteries from 77 to 85 and try to look at other arteries that helps the state overall.
Sure.
Cherryville, everybody wants to help Cherryville, but you got to put something that helps the whole area, the whole state.
Well, and now remember, so that those MPOs, by the way, are made up primarily of local elected officials. Cherryville, they have their members. Gaston County, Bessemer City, Cleveland County, Shelby, the municipalities, they all have, Gastonia, whoever it might be, they all have members who sit on that MPO board. And those MPO members have the power to start moving forward and thinking about submitting projects for prioritization. So, that is not something that a General Assembly member does. Now, our voices do count. We can make public comments just like the general public. They have a public comment period for all submitted projects. But our voice can count, but it's those, and this part of the reason we did the new formula this way is to have more local voices involved. And so they have the option now to look at 150 and say, hey, from wherever we want to submit this for prioritization. So they can do that.
I know one thing I see, why does it take so long to get these projects done? I mean, it's like we built the interstate system through Eisenhower in a couple of years, and it takes us 2 years to build a bridge.
Well, I can tell you a lot of that. I can tell you exactly what part of it is, and part of that is it has been the federal environmental permitting process and lawsuits that go along with that. And remember, the old Garden Parkway in southern Gaston County, it was tied up in a federal lawsuit. It was an environmental permitting lawsuit. And so that happens, that even held us up on the Dallas-Cherryville Highway. That and the other part about that too are the utilities. Some of these projects, the utility aspect of it is monumental in trying to get all the utilities moved, Duke Energy, whoever it might be. That can be pretty complicated. And then, for a long time, and even today, money. And so when you had money being funneled to one area of the state by one powerful politician, it left some of our rural areas out. And we've changed that. And that's why you're starting to see these rural projects are going forward
Well, that's
around
why I
here
asked
now.
about the appropriations, if it's spread out a little more. And it sounds like it is.
It is. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, here's an interesting point you might enjoy as a numbers person. So these projects that are submitted for scoring, they can, if their score's lower, they can cascade down to a lower tier of funding where there's not as much money. But right now, the highest, one of the highest scoring projects in the state that's in statewide mobility is that widening of 85 starting over at Charlotte and coming this way. And then the rest of 85 all the way to South Carolina is also going to be put through the prioritization process.
Well, 85 at Ranlow, it's just a mess. It's a parking
Mhm.
lot day, in the mornings and in the evenings, that whole little area right there.
And listen to this, Rusty. I used to chair transportation, so I've been involved in it. 85 could have been widened in Gaston County years ago, but you had a few people who were influential at the MPO level, and they were more interested in another project, and they took attention off of 85. Otherwise, it could have been done years ago.
Well, and sometimes we need more arteries too, instead of widening what we have, which is always good. You need other avenues because one wreck on 85, you're shut down, so.
Well, those projects can be submitted for prioritization. Your local elected officials now, they submit projects for prioritization. Our county commissioner is on there. Just to give you an idea, we've got lots of local people around this area on that board. Now, one other interesting part about this is if you have a project that moves into another planning organization, like they sometimes talk about a bridge into Mecklenburg County from Gaston County. Well, that was part of the plan, but as I told you, when that federal lawsuit, a low score, and some other issues, the airport stopped that project, the people in Charlotte pulled that project from their list and said, hey, you can't build it. We've got more needs over here we need to take care of. We're pulling it from our list. We're not funding it anymore. So it's complicated. It can be very complicated. And like I said, the reason I know it's because I used to chair transportation. I was forced to learn it.
Well, I think Charlotte hasn't come west because of the Catawba River. If we had more crossings, more avenues to get west, I think our growth would be faster.
Well, that was attempted.
Not to say that's a good thing. I mean, controlled growth is good. Everybody wants growth, but sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for too.
Well, and just remember, the lots of variables go into those data-driven projects: freight, cost, all of those types of things. And so remember, there was a plan on the books to try to have a project go into Mecklenburg County. But remember, it was stopped because, one, the federal lawsuit; two, it had a low score under the data-driven process; and three, you had, as I mentioned earlier, that airport at the Charlotte runway that interfered with the configuration. And so that project was going into another MPO, remember? And so that's the reason Charlotte said, wait a minute, if it can't be built, we've got other projects we need to put our money on. And so that a new bridge, now I'm talking other than the ones we're getting replaced, the South Fork and the Catawba, a new bridge in southern Gaston County can always be submitted for prioritization again. Nothing stops the local elected officials on the MPO board from doing that.
Well, I think down the road, we'll have to look at transportation, monorail systems, hub and spoke, because, Charlotte, we're going to be on the outskirts of Charlotte. It's coming.
Yeah.
We sort of are now, but, the Carolinas are continue to grow.
The light rail has been studied. It's been looked at. There've been people that wanted it to go all the way to Kings Mountain from Charlotte. But Rusty, as it stands right now, with all the other transportation needs, including following a natural disaster, all the projects that are getting ready to start here. Remember, we're getting ready to see a couple of $1 billion worth of projects right here in our area. The cost of that light rail is just not feasible. It's billions and it's just billions and billions of dollars. And
Yeah.
it's probably not feasible in the near future with all of these other projects that are already prioritized.
Yeah, I always thought that the light rail should have been up like a monorail system, get it up off the ground. I just, and they're not as intrusive to land and roads, and just
Yeah.
like Disney World, just get it up off
Yeah.
the ground a
The,
little
the
bit.
cost is astronomical.
Yeah.
It's astronomical.
Well, Kelly, is there anything else that you would like to say in closing? I think we covered a lot. Is there something else you would like to say?
Well, I would just end up and say, I think I've already explained the reasons I'm running again, but I did want to mention that since 2011, we've drastically dropped the tax rate here in North Carolina. Our our personal income tax, the highest level was 7.75 when we first took control. And now that just on January 1 at the state level went to 3.99%. If we meet other targets of revenue targets, it's even going to go lower. The corporate level is on its way to zero. And that's going to happen, I think, is approximately 2030 that's going to happen. So we've done a great job in being fiscally conservative, cutting taxes, and starting to eliminate our debt. We've been able to maintain our AAA bond rating, which when all of these people around the country look to North Carolina for job creation, economic security, that's why we were named the #1 state in the country under our leadership for economic development. And just last week, we were named #1 in the country by Site Selection Magazine for workforce development. That, along with all of our education enhancements, teacher pay raises, you can see here just in Cleveland and Gaston County, our school boards in September were touting the improvements that they've had. So you hear a lot of negativity coming from outside the state and a few special interest groups. But if you really look at the numbers for the teacher pay raises, the investments in education, school choice, and all of those issues that all go into that, we've come a long way by now being named the #1 state for business.
Do you feel, I know we back to education, it seemed like charter schools have come about the past maybe 20 years or so. How do you think that's affected public education as far as the charter schools?
So remember, charter schools are public, and they were passed into law when the Democrats controlled the state Senate. And, I was not there then, but I've gone back and researched it. I researched, what they were doing. And those public charter schools were given more flexibility for less public money. That's how that worked out. And those public charter schools, they can also be involved in the state retirement system. So if a teacher decides that they want to go to a public charter school, if that public charter school board has voted to allow it, they can remain in the retirement system. But they are public schools, remember, they're not private. Now, one other thing that we also did that you hear a lot about, we passed opportunity scholarships, which that does provide scholarships for kids to go to private schools if they so choose. But actually those scholarships for the taxpayers cost less than it costs to educate a child or a student in a traditional public school. So we're not defeating the traditional public school. We're actually making it better in a lot of ways. I used to be licensed to teach, and you have a lot of students in a classroom who have to have education plans because of certain issues. It could be hearing, it could be sight, it could be a learning disability, whatever it might be. So sometimes the private schools might have a few more resources to handle those kids with let's say learning challenges, hearing challenges, sight challenges. And so what that helps do is that helps take some of those kids, put them into private school, which frees up the traditional public school teachers not to have quite the responsibility that they would have otherwise.
I would say charter schools are semi-public because you don't really have a school board. I mean, the voter really doesn't have much of a say-so in the running of that charter school.
No, they're public. They're totally charter schools are totally public schools. There's no,
But they don't have school boards. I mean,
well,
like
but
administration.
they still have oversight. But remember, remember that was the agreement in the beginning.
Yeah.
Remember when the Democrats controlled the state Senate, we had a division there, and they decided to pass public charter schools into law. Remember, the trade-off was, yes, you have more flexibility, but you don't get the same amount of public funding. That's why you see public charter schools always having fundraisers for their facilities. They don't get their facilities funded by the taxpayers, but they are, without question, public.
What kind of
schools.
oversight's on the administration of charter schools?
Well, one of the biggest oversights is competition. If parents and guardians, a lot of students don't have parents, they're in group homes or whatever it might be. But those who have kids in a public charter school, if they don't like it, they can leave. And same thing with a private school. And that's part of the competition that's going on in education right now.
Gotcha. Well, that's about a wrap for me, I think, unless you have something else that you would like to say.
I think that's it. Other than I did pull up the list here. We talked about the education lottery.
Mhm.
Here's what some of the money goes to. Pre-K, non-instructional support, school capital. A lot of people forget that. Needs-based school capital, meaning really poor counties. Repairs and renovations of existing school systems, scholarship funds, the Children of Wartime Veterans Scholarship, and what's going from 21 million this year to, in 24-25 to 25-26, that's going from 21 million to 182 million, roughly, for school transportation. Now, just to clarify what the auditor said, yes, we're seeing more lottery funds coming in and less going out, but it's taking more to run that big lottery operation. So just thought I would clarify that because people do ask me about the lottery fairly often.
Well, everyone sees all the commercials and everything, so they just be a little curious where the money's going.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing that I would say that's really been that we focus on, one, Second Amendment rights. We've really enhanced Second Amendment rights since 2011. And the situation that's cropped up all of a sudden in the last few years where grown men are now trying to have the legal ability to go into changing facilities, grown nude men, by the way, into changing facilities with women and little girls. And also adult men trying to get involved in women's sports. We're not letting that happen.
Yeah, that was just passed, was it not? As far as the bathroom,
we're not letting that happen.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't just bathrooms. That was a misnomer. People used to say a bathroom bill based on we had to stop what Charlotte was doing, but it was more than a bathroom bill. It was changing facilities, et cetera. And so when you say bathroom and you know, that's one thing, but when you start letting grown nude men into changing facilities with little girls and women, that's just something that we were not going to let that happen. Not legally anyway.
Understood. Yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it, sir. There's plenty more, but
yeah, we could talk for hours probably.
Mm-hmm.
But we really appreciate you coming into the studios today, and you're going to be busy on the campaign trail. You do have a challenger, Caroline Eason. You know, she's your challenger. So, and a lot of people don't vote in the primaries. A lot of people, they miss the primaries, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is March 3rd, and early voting is February 12th.
Yeah.
And then you said mail-in start next week.
Yeah, start next week. And by the way, I have no problem with my opponent. As a matter of fact, someone told me the other day that she's, I think, now engaged and starting to move into that phase of life. I think she's engaged to a gentleman over in Belmont. So I'm not sure if she's moving to Belmont, which is not in the district, but I'm not sure what they'll do with their family situation. But congratulations to her on moving forward.
And it's
getting
every
married.
2 years. It's amazing that it's every 2 years. It seemed like you get in there and it's time to campaign again.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Any term limits you think down the road?
Well, we don't really get asked for term limits for mayor or
Yeah.
city council or state house because we're at the state level. We're part time. We're a part time General Assembly. We're not full time like Congress, so we don't really get that many requests for term limits. And of course, we already have some term limits in place constitutionally, and for the president,
Well,
and the
people
governor, et cetera.
local politics kind of gets in your pocketbook more than anything. A lot of people get caught up with the White House, get caught up with federal stuff, but local is grassroots. That gets in your pocketbook.
Sure. And also we do have term limits with the election process. And I tried to make when people asked me, said they wanted to run, I tried to make the term limits process work at the state level. But like I said, we're a part-time General Assembly, and it could work. But I tried, like I said, I tried to give the seat away. And
Getting
empower
people to
somebody
run could
else.
be an issue.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing, Rusty. People are starting to realize the difficulties of the logistics of having a place in Raleigh to stay on very low pay,
And driving back and forth.
driving back and forth. We receive very low pay. We receive one round trip, 29 cents per mile to operate a vehicle. The IRS rate is up over 70 cents per mile. And we receive $104 per day per diem while we're in session. The federal per diem level for Raleigh is approaching $170. So our per diem level doesn't even cover a decent hotel and meals.
Well, driving 85 or 40, that's enough to pull your hair out.
It's become much more aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, mentioning that, and I know we need to stop. We just saw that it looks like the previous governor and possibly this one, we're trying to figure it out. They were issuing licenses to people who were not here possibly legally, or they didn't meet the legal qualifications of having the CDL. And I think you just saw the federal level was threatening to punish North Carolina financially based on those gubernatorial actions because the governors are in charge of that aspect of DMV and who they appoint. So I've noticed in the last 15 years that it feels a lot more aggressive on the highways.
Yeah. The DMV, that's a whole nother topic in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is dangerous on the highways, and the DOT, I'm sure they're doing a good job on trying to make everyone safe. So that's their job, to design another roads and everything. Well, Kelly, appreciate you coming in.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Viewers, appreciate Kelly Hastings coming in. That is running again for House 110 in the Cherryville, Shelby, and towards Gaston area, I guess you could say.
Yeah, we call it Western Gaston County and pretty much Upper Cleveland, starting in Shelby, Upper Cleveland.
Well, appreciate you coming in here. And viewers, if you're a candidate out there, we'd love to have you in for the 2026 election. Just give us an email at newsdesk@wisenewsnetwork.com. I'm Rusty Wise with the Wise News Network in the studios with Kelly Hastings. Appreciate him coming in. Until you see us again, stay tuned for more.
Thank you.